Okay, we are back for round two, part two of global versus local reactions. So let's dive in. As I said in the last video, we are looking at ideologies in the latter part of the 1800s. So we're taking about 1850 through the rest of the century. We're moving towards that pivot point that sort of sets the world up for World War I. And so that you just have that in the back of your head. That's kind of where we're going. We're moving in that direction. But right now we're dealing with the globalization of the world. The making smaller communities, networks, partnerships, the interaction between all these different countries and their motherland, or however you want to call, Britain, France, Italy, things like that, Spain. And so we talked a little bit about how there was this bit of a delay. There was a little bit of a disconnect between what was going on back at home, back in the motherland, back in Western Europe, and all of the little satellites, all the little colonies, all the little ports and places of business and interaction with the rest of the world. And that delay put a lot of responsibility, a lot of emphasis and the need to and responsibility on the local representative. So the person, the man in the street, the guy who's in that spot, so to speak, that person is now sort of burdened with the idea of they have to make choices without waiting for contact from motherland. There's still that gap. And that was creating certain situations, not only with people who were connected to the mother country, but also the local people with local people, the people who were in favor of XYZ country and doing business with them, and those that are in the same country that are not in favor of doing that kind of thing. There was clashes there. So I want to look at some specifics of how people chose to react throughout this time. We talked a little bit about assimilation. That was people before. Good example of this of adaptation. Is that what I said on the last one? Ha! Adaptation. Let's look at adaptation. That's the one I want to look at. If you are familiar with the movie that's a Roger and Hammerstein musical called The King and I, this takes place in a country called Siam, the Kingdom of Siam. It's in present-day Indonesia, Cambodia, that region. If you are looking at this map, the right side of that map would be current-day Vietnam, Cambodia in the south, Laos, things like that. But during this time, Siam, this kingdom, was a huge kingdom of land. And the king at that time was faced with a decision. How do I react to the presence, to the push, to the forces of Britain in this region? Do I fight back? Do I just completely throw out my hands and just say, take me as you want? Or am I going to be crafty? Am I going to find ways to adapt to the British way of life? And he does. The King and I is based on a book. This is supposedly a real story. A governess from Britain is brought into the court of the king to help train his children, particularly his boys, on Western culture, Western ideas, Western mannerisms, so that they fit in. So that there's a little bit of this, it's not assimilation, but there's this little bit of meshing. We want to look like we belong. And so he hires this governess to come in, and the musical itself is really about this love affair between the two of them. But in the end, this king and his children learn from this governess, and his son, his main son, when he takes over as king during this time, during the 50s, 1850s, 1860s, you have this fine gentleman. It's the gentleman in the chair on the right. Now, culturally speaking, he is coronated in his traditional garb. So look at the differences between the king as being coronated in traditional garb, very culturally inundated with the Siamese culture, very traditional, and yet here is the king in 1897 with all of his sons now. This is the eldest of the children from the movie The King and I. He is now in Western garb with a tie and a collar and a jacket and shoes and pants, and all of his sons are likewise dressed as well. They have enculturated themselves into the ways of the West. Now, did he give up his authority as king? Nope. Was he still able to maintain some good partnerships with Britain throughout this time? Absolutely. They had a wonderful time, and it wasn't until, like, I think the 1940s that Siam continued like this until it became Thailand. So that's one way of adapting. They adapted the clothes, the mannerisms, the foods, the culture, the language, without giving up their tradition, without giving up their own sort of sovereign rule over their nation. That's adapting. Revolt. We talked about these folks a little bit in the last video. The Maori people, they were on that little island of New Zealand in the 1860s. Britain decided it wanted that particular region, so it goes in and it tries to take these, these native savages, so to speak. I'm sure that's how they were viewed in the minds of the civilized, posh British. But they were not going to give up their land, and to this day they're still there. They are still there and a very active and important part of the New Zealand culture. But they revolted. They didn't necessarily completely win, but they didn't completely lose either. They only lost part of it, part of the islands and part of the control. So that's revolt. India, though, as I said, initially it was very, they decided to assimilate. They were going to become part of British culture. They joined the trades and the markets that were going between India and Britain. They invested in them. Even the princes of that time that were sort of sub-rulers, they were there. They ended up being a part of this commercial networking, financial investments. People in India invested lots of money into railroad building, into building ships and ports and ways of transporting things. They were very heavily invested in the British Indian conglomerate, and they joined their military. I mean, by the time you get to the 1850s, 1855s, and that time frame, there's actually more Indian soldiers in the British Army than there are British soldiers in this time. They're in South Africa, they are in Egypt, they're pretty much anywhere you can think of. They are really a part of the British populace. They're part of the British life. And this intertwining, this mixing is where I say it's almost assimilation. There's still a couple of this map shows a couple orange spots where there's still some princes who kind of reign in that area, but they're giving really homage to the British government. The pink and the blue, that's all Britain. But this tense harmony, shall we call it, that has been going on for a while, it kind of reaches a peak in 1857, and we have what they call the Indian Mutiny. There are internal factions that are really strained amongst the Muslim people and the Hindu people. They feel like they're losing some of their traditions, they're losing some of their identity, particularly in that area that is circled in the red. This was a very heavy Hindu-Muslim region. And when Britain came in and kind of took it over, it was like, but by 1857, British way of living really began to clash with the lives and the traditions and cultures of the Muslims and the Hindus. One example is that the military decided to take the cartridges that they used to fill their guns. They were in little bags, and you would rip off the bag with your teeth and pour the powder in your gun to get ready to shoot. Well, the bag was sealed with pig fat, and you can't have a Muslim putting his mouth on pig fat. That was it would defile his being. It would make him impure. It was unclean, and so they rose up in 1857 and started these rights, and it just kind of spread. It just sparked everywhere, and so there was a lot of clashes. These civil wars with Indian fighting Indian, Muslim Indian, Hindu Indian, even some Indians who had been in the military for the British were fighting British and those British loyal Indians that were still staying on their side. So you had all this civil unrest going on in India during this time. Britain won. The punishment was very, very brutal. They put even stricter governors and government in place and really put down things. One of the punishments that they had was called being blown from guns. They would put these people who were rebels, they would lash them to the front of a cannon, and then they would fire the cannonball. And that was their way of sort of dealing with the rebel spirit, kind of crushing them. But India is not the only one. Remember, we talked a while back about the Opium Wars and the amount of force that Britain, along with France a little bit, kind of put into just beating down China. Well, at about this time, 1850s, we got the Qing dynasty. It's in a pretty troubled state. Food is very scarce. Population is starting to grow. Remember that Malthusian trap from way back when? Okay, so people are starving. Poverty is rampant. Foreign powers control major ports. They are actually in control within the boundaries of the country. These are foreigners, foreign cultures, foreign ideas, foreign laws, and they're infiltrating the people and the public. They're pouring opium in again into China in the Second Opium War that lasted until about 1861. And out of this time period rises out of the people who are fed up with the government that's in control, people who are going to rebel. They're going to rebel against their own people. Their own people have made deals and wheeling and dealing with foreign powers, and it's corrupting and not good for the average person. One guy, and I'm going to butcher this name, I'm sorry, Hong Kui-Zhong. Told you I was going to butcher it. I'm sorry, I apologize. He is going to be, he's been raised, trained by foreign missionaries, foreign Christian. He's heard the gospel. He has read the Bible. He knows the story of Jesus and what's going to happen. And he sort of grabs some of the Christian ideologies, and he grabs some of the Chinese traditions and needs and the wants of the moment, and he kind of marries them, and he raises himself up as Jesus's brother. He is the Tiong Wang, which is heavenly king. And that again, it's that fusion of Christian and Chinese ideas together. And he's going to rally up the people under this sort of strange Christian modified Chinese ideology, that he is the Messiah, he is the new king, he is coming to save the day. And so they follow him because they're in poverty, they're hurting, they need a solution. And so they rise up and come against the existing government, the emperor at that time. And this becomes the Taiping Rebellion. It's estimated about 20 million people died during this time. It's a long fight. A long, long fight. But this is by 1861. Look how much control the rebellion has. They have Shanghai, Hangzhou, Nanjing. They have Wuhan. They got a whole bunch of China. This is the richest part of China, richest land. But if you also notice, look at where it is. The area that they dominate are those areas that foreign powers have all of those different ports along the river, along the coast. These are all very heavy dominant with Britain and France. So it's interesting that the rebellion initially sort of rises up where British interests are the greatest. Perhaps Britain initially went, oh, this would be a good way to get even more. We'll sort of let the rebels do their thing, and it will put down the government. A weaker government allows us to do more and more. I don't know that for a fact, but it just seems kind of quinky-dinky that the rebels are strongest where Britain and France had their most ports. As I said, the rebellion lasts between 1850 and 1864. And then the Qing emperor mysteriously dies in 1861. And the Empress Dowager, and I'm going to butcher her name. I don't know how to say this name. I have it in my head, watch the videos, but I don't know how to say it. So I apologize. So the Empress Dowager, who is the mother, she was the concubine of the previous emperor, had one son. She rises and becomes co-regent with the son. The son's kind of young. And they make this deal with Britain. You help fight on our side, put down the rebellion, and we'll do good things for you. And so Britain decides, yep, sure, that's what we're going to do. The rebellion is completely squashed. And so obviously China, in reaction to this, has to do something. They realize they are weak. They are not militarily strong. And so they go through what they call self-strengthening. They're going to set in reforms that build up their internal strength, that industrialize their nation more. This is a picture of a Gatling gun, which is like an early machine gun that was being manufactured and produced in China during this time, just to build up China's internal strength. But that's a big reaction to Britain and France's globalization moves into that country. That's a lot of little chain effects. Japan is no different. We have Emperor Meiji. If you can see, let me just take a look at that guy. Does that look like your samurai shogun? No. But the shogun was the predominant ruler, symbol of authority at this time in China. Emperor Meiji, he wanted to nationalize and modernize Japan. Again, remember you had Matthew Perry coming in, and rather than pushing Matthew Perry out, pushing the United States out, or fighting back, or completely just laying down and just showing your belly like a little dog or something, I surrender. Meiji was smarter. He was more like the king of Siam. He invited them in. He learned from them. He saw the benefit and the power that Matthew Perry's steamships were bringing in, his warships, and so he begins to change and turn around some reforms for Japan to unify it, to nationalize it, to give it its own identity, to be a player on the global scene along with all the other big boys. But of course, this again sparks some local resistance. Not everybody wants to do this. They start to fight back. And so he has to go through a series of civil wars in his own country just to go over and put them down. Where does he go for help? Britain and France. He says, you know, join me, help me. And Britain and France are thinking, this guy is going to be just like us. He's going to be a marketer. He's going to be a consumer of our goods. He's going to need us, and we're going to make money off of him. Yes, we will help him. And so Japan modernizes. Another gentleman, this gentleman looks in more of the traditional Japanese attire at this time. Fukuzawa Yukichi, I believe is his name. If you look in American books, they actually switch the names, but his surname is Fukuzawa, and in Japan you put that name first. You give that honor, that family name honor first. But he was an educational reformer. He really thought it was important to educate the Japanese people. He went to Nagasaki to learn the Dutch way. The Dutch, it wasn't necessarily all Dutch, but they called it the Dutch way of learning. And he wanted to go to America, to study there, to look at the Western world, and to take what he could from it. But he also wanted to keep some of the Japanese tradition. I mean, look at him. He's still dressed in the traditional attire. He didn't want to give that up. He did start Japan's first newspapers, and he founded Japan's Kyoto University, which is still there today. It's one of the famous universities there. So he's the educational reformer. He's the newspaper informational guy that kind of brings Japan up in that regard. And you can look at here. Here's some pictures during that time. The one on your left, this is just a common. I mean, if you look at the people, you got people who are still sort of in the kimono, the very traditional outfit, but also in the Western wear. There's railroads that are going through here. You got the rail station on the left-hand side and Mount Fuji in the back. Very traditional mixed with modern. The lady on the right, this is a Japanese woman. She is, if you see her, she's attired in a European sort of gown and outfit in front of a German sewing machine. It's been sort of marketed with some of the decorations to fit more of the Japanese market, though. But this is very different than what was going on, say, in China. China was holding on to its traditions. Here's another one. This is if you look at the green lines, this is all the railroads that have been brought into the islands to move about business and manufacturing. The dark orange or the dark red, these are the concentrated areas where people have moved to, migrated to major manufacturing regions. Tokyo, Kyoto, things like that. And and this is all on the eastern hemisphere, yes, but there's also true, things are moving in the western hemisphere. So 1861, 1864, you have the Civil War, American Civil War. This is just as much a question of global versus local as any of these others. Globally, you had economies from the south, economies from the north, connected to economies and ideologies in Western Europe and around the world. The people in the south were the suppliers. They were supplying goods back to England, back to France. They were thriving. Their economy, their way of life depended on that global connection. But at the same time, global ideas and global ideologies are spreading. England had abolished slavery long time before this. Now they're out patrolling to keep Islamic enslaved markets closed, or slave markets closed. They're trying to. America is this picture of the republic, the government of the people. Can the people actually run their own government? can the nation, this republic nation, can it be a part of this as well? And so these ideologies and these economies are in conflict at this time in the United States, and slavery's at the very heart of it. And they're going to fight, and slavery is going to be eradicated. Now, is it going to be complete, everybody's going to be hugging each other and kumbaya moments and everything? No, of course not. That has to be worked out. There are people that are going to continue for years and years and years and years to try to put the slave, try to put the black man back where he belongs, back in the enslavement. Why? To protect their old economies, to protect their old ideologies. And sadly, there's going to be fuel that's going to be thrown on this fire, and you're going to have, at this time, between the 1860s through the end of the 1800s, an explosion of ideologies that are going to mingle, they're going to conflict with one another, they're going to fuel one another. There's going to be a big hot mess, and these ideologies, these isms, shall we call them, are going to grow out of this and grow stronger. People are going to grab the ones that work for them, that favor their benefit, that work for their benefit. Others are going to grab their other ones, and you're going to have people fighting ideas and isms within their own countries and around the world. And that's where we're going next week with the initial part of our ideologies and liberalism of the mid-1800s. So, enjoy your week, take notes, and we'll see you in a week's time.